Hey everyone! So the other day my dad called me up and he asked me if I had something that could dig a hole. To which I said, yes I do. Now, he has some problems with some old pipework at his property, and unfortunately it's at the point where there is just no other way. We're gonna have to dig down to it and get hands on the problem. And as we were talking, it slowly turned into, when we had the machine there anyway, maybe we could go ahead and put in some drains, which is another project he needs doing. So I'm gonna have to bring the old Ford over to my dad and help him out with a few things. But before we do that, there's some repairs we have to do to this thing. So first of all, I'm going to have to do a little bit of repair work to the digging shovels on the rear of this machine. Well, not so much this one. It is mostly all right. The only thing I might want to do something about is this loosely fitted weird cutting edge they put on the teeth themselves. I know some machines do have that, but this was not designed like this. This is something someone welded on, and it has broken off the middle teeth. It's just barely hanging on, as these teeth don't really fit very well either. I might just go and remove all of this stuff anyway. I'm not really doing the kind of digging where it makes a whole lot of sense to have teeth on it, so I might just take this off and just leave it as a bare shovel. The main repair is going to be the two other shovels that I have for it. These things are not only very worn out, but the big one is also very bent. And the cutting edge is pretty much gone on both of them. This is just rounded off. That's not going to make a very good dig at all. And also it's rotting along the edges, so I might have to put some big patches into this thing. Now, so far I haven't even had these mounted on the machine. I rarely do anything where I need these kinds of shovels, but because we are going to be digging small trenches for his drains, I might want to use this narrow trenching bucket. And to try and make the whole thing nice when we're done, I might also want this big grading bucket. So I think we're going to have to patch up both of these so we can bring them along. And the other thing is that even though my dad doesn't live very far from here, I do have to take this out on the road to get to him. So we're gonna have to do a few fixes to make this road legal again. And it mostly has to do with the light. There is barely any light left on this machine. I think I have one functional headlights, a couple of indicators, and maybe a single light on the rear. And also there are no working lights on it. We are getting into the winter time, so it is getting dark around here most of the time. So it would be really nice to have some work lights on this as well. And depending on how much time I have, there is a couple other things that would be nice to fix up on this now that we are doing it. Part of it is this battery cover on the box here. This is just a piece of wood that someone put on here. That's not the way it's supposed to look. Also, it had a block screwed on here, which was actually a nice extra step to get up into the machine, but that broke off and nearly twisted my ankle. Also, the seat that's in here, it doesn't have a lock on it, so that is just always free spinning. That doesn't really worry me too much when I'm just driving around here on the property, but it would be nice to be able to lock that when I'm out on the road. And there is a handful of other little things all around that could use some attention, but yeah, we're gonna have to see how much time we have. Now, I really wasn't planning on doing a bunch of repairs on this machine right now. Honestly, I have a lot of other projects that I should be doing, but I gotta go help my dad, and also, to be fair, these were repairs that I was gonna have to do at some point anyway, so what better time than now? Let's get to it, and let's start with those shovels. I do feel like this is a bit of a repeat of how the previous video started out. Now I know we just did a bunch of metal work in the last video, but here's some more metal work. Right, so here are my 3 shovels, or buckets. I mean, I keep switching between saying bucket or shovel. I don't rightly know exactly what is the correct term. The direct translation of what I would normally say is shovel, but I also hear them referred to as buckets pretty often. Let me know in the comments, are these buckets or shovels? Anyway, I think we'll start with my main shovel here, because hopefully that's going to be the easiest one, as all I really have to do is remove the teeth out here in the front. I don't really know why they've welded a bit of cutting edge onto the teeth rather than the shovel itself. This has also made the shovel a little bit too long. If you curl it up too early, this part will hit the arm of the excavator. But the welds have also broken off these 2 middle teeth here, and everything is so worn that it's all just rattling around, making a ton of noise. So I'm just going to get rid of this stuff. I'm never digging in anything that's solid enough to justify having teeth on this. Besides, with what they've done here, it's digging with this flat edge anyway before it gets to the teeth, so they're not even doing anything at this point. But I doubt we can unscrew any of these bolts. You know what? I'm not even going to try. Let's just cut them. Alright, well, honestly, I thought this would be worse behind. I mean, you can still sort of see where the teeth were. It is worn a little bit more in between those, but overall, this is still a much more straight edge than what was on the outside of those teeth before. Of course, it is still worn, but really not all that bad, and I'm not using this machine commercially. I don't do that much digging, so this part is going to last a really long time in my hands. The other thing that I'm a little more concerned about, now that I have been looking at it a little bit more, is the whole bottom part of this shovel. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but the whole thing is caving in, both here and up there. This has just been worn so thin that the metal is just deforming. Yeah, you know what, now that we have these off and we're doing repairs anyway, I should probably go and cut this out and put a new bottom in this thing, because this is not going to last that much longer. Eventually this whole thing is just going to cave in. See if I can give you guys a better look where all this dust has settled. All the way along there, it has already cracked. So the whole bottom of this is falling out, and it's letting go up there in the rusty area as well. Again, I don't know how well you can tell on camera, but it's really concave, this whole part. It's become very thin. Because obviously when you're digging, you're constantly pushing that back side of the shovel up against the dirt, so you just wear out the bottoms at some point. So it looks like I'm going to be doing a little bit more repair to this one than I initially planned. But I'm going to need some steel for that, so we got to figure out how thick it's supposed to be. Might actually be able to get a measurement right up here. 6, roughly. What about the sides? Yeah, just about 6. It looks like they only have some 5 mil available at the local steel shop. The next size up is 8. That's going to be a bit much. It's also going to be really difficult to handle. You know what? I think we'll just go with 5. It's going to be a little bit easier for me to handle with my basic stuff around here. And also, being honest, this thing has been surviving with the paper-thin stuff that's in there now. So at 5 mil, it's going to be a lot better than what we have now. So I'll go do a bit of shopping tomorrow. Well, now that I was out shopping anyway, I just got some other stuff that I needed as well. But here is my 5 mil piece of steel. But it's gonna rust pretty quickly in this weather, so let's see if I can muscle this inside. Ugh. If only I had a big machine that could move heavy stuff. Now, I'm going to have to be a little bit tactical about this, because if I do it right, I think I can repair all 3 shovels with just this one sheet of steel, and of course those pieces of Hoddock's cutting edge that I cut out in the last video. So I'm going to go ahead and start measuring all of these out and figure out how much of this I have to cut away, and see if I can map out some pieces on this sheet of steel. Well, good news. Looks like I'm gonna have plenty of material to do this. I'll even have a square left down here so I can fix up some of those rotten corners in the sides. Right, so with all that figured out, let's go ahead and cut the bottom out of this. Actually, I'm wondering if I can do that with the plasma cutter. That would save a lot of cutting discs. Let's give it a try. Well, this nozzle is pretty much spent, but let's just give it a try, see if it'll even cut into this dirty, rusty stuff. Well, now you can really see how thin this stuff had become. I mean, there are places it has already completely rusted through, but the rest of it, it's no more than like 2 millimeters at best. So now we get to the tricky part. I have to somehow bend this piece of steel to follow this shape of the shovel here. Now, the right way to do it would probably just be to put it in some rollers and just give it that curve, but I don't have that and I don't have access to it anywhere nearby. And really the strongest thing that I have right now, that is the backhoe. So I'm thinking, because this first part here is straight, if I get it lined up and get it started down here and weld it in place, then hook the bucket onto the excavator arm of the backhoe and then use that to curl it around and bend this in place and then weld it as I go along. I don't know how well that's going to work. It might be a terrible idea, but let's give it a try. My biggest concern with this is if it starts shifting sideways as we go along, then it's not going to line up here when we get to the end. So I'm hoping if I start it out where I have it in between the sides like this, and then tag it down there in the bottom, bring it up to where it stops being flat, and then weld this whole bottom part. We should have it pointed in the right direction. Oh yeah. Well, this might actually work for the first part where it's just mildly curving. Yeah, that was it. But what if we start getting a little bit creative with some ratchets, maybe? Oh yeah. Ah, no. It's really tight now. I don't think we can push this anymore, but that was really most of it. But we might not have to put it on the excavator. Maybe I could just use the front bucket and just push down on it with that. Let's just try that. That would be a lot quicker. Well, this is actually working out much better than I thought it would. I'm really liking the look of this so far. Now, I did leave this a little bit longer than it needed to be because it was kind of difficult to measure out the length along this curve, so I wasn't very sure in my measurement, and it actually has to be a little bit shorter than what I thought, so that's all good. But also, leaving this piece on here, it gave me a little bit more leverage and something to push and pull on to bend this whole thing. But now we're in the final stretch, so we can go ahead and cut off this last part. Right, so I think I'm ready for the final push, so to speak. But I'm gonna have to put a lot of force on this now because all my leverage is gone. So I think I'm gonna have to prop this up so I'm coming down at it almost vertically. Otherwise, I'm just gonna push this across the floor.
All right. Well, that was a bit of an unusual method, but I actually think it worked out really well. I mean, I didn't get a super flush finish up here at the end. The whole plate was getting a little bit distorted, so when I was pressing down at one point, it was sort of buckling up in other places, so I sort of just had to do the best I could, but it'll be fine once we do some full welds on this. But speaking of welding, I have been thinking this is actually a great opportunity to try something that I really haven't done a whole lot, which is stick welding. And when I say I haven't done it a whole lot, what I really mean is that I haven't done it at all. I mean, I've been lighting those sticks a couple of times just to try it, but I've never had to do any real welding with that. And something like this, it doesn't have to be pretty or anything, so this would be a great thing to try and practice it on. And also, I'm gonna have to do a whole lot of welding. I have to weld these plates all the way around on both sides on all three shovels, as well as parts of the sides of those two. So there's gonna be a whole lot of welding. And if I can do that with the sticks, I'm gonna save quite a lot of the costly gas and wire from the MIG welder. So let's give that a try. I haven't even tried the stick function on this machine yet. Where do we have it? Here. MMA, mixed martial arts, 200 amps. That sounds like a lot. I really don't know what I'm aiming for. Let's put it somewhere below max, 85. I've been given a bunch of these things. They are 70-14. I don't really know what that means. Some of you guys probably know. Now, should we do a practice run? Nah, the whole thing is a practice run. Let's just hit it. It's actually not looking too bad, except that I left some holes in it here and there, but the weld itself looks pretty nice and solid. Well, I'd say this is definitely good enough for what it's for, so let's just keep going with it. Well, I'm no pipeline welder, that's for sure. I'm still leaving some holes in here and there, but overall, given that I haven't done this before, it's not the worst I've ever seen, and it'll definitely hold for what I'm doing. That ended up taking all day, and here I thought this would be the easy one. But we still have two more to go. Let's do the little one. Now this one doesn't need just one huge patch put in it. This needs a bunch of little repairs all around. Now we'll need to replace at least the first half of this bottom piece, but I also need to replace these front corners, and it needs new cutting edges on it, both the main cutting edge, but also the sides. They're all rounded off as well. And we even have to do a couple of repairs back here to the attachments. And overall, this whole shovel looks very home built, and the whole thing is really not made super straight. You can see these sides particularly, they are not at the same angle. The one over there ends about an inch above this square tube, where this one is almost flat with it. So the whole thing is a bit misaligned. And also, just looking at it out here in the front, I can see that this cutting edge is tilting this way a little bit relative to the attachment points up there. Now, all of these misalignments are not super critical. My machine is not that precise, so this thing is still good enough for what I'm doing. But now that we're cutting into it anyway, I'm just going to try to see if I can at least line up this cutting edge. But before we try and do that, we're going to have to make some repairs to the attachment point back here and make sure that is nice and secure, because they have almost broken off this one eye of the attachment point here. See, it has a massive crack running down here, and it's a little hard to tell, but it runs back here quite a bit as well. Now, it looks to me like this whole attachment point was just cut off of something else and just welded onto the back of this. And that's probably why it has these weird cutoffs right here. This would have been significantly stronger if it kept going all the way down and attached to this big square as well. So I'm probably going to make some little triangles and fill out this part after we've repaired this crack. I've never had this attached to the machine, so I just want to make sure that it's at least reasonably aligned. Oh, it is. There's even a bit of play in there, so that's good enough for me. We'll just weld it up as it is. Found an old cutoff of something that is almost the right thickness. All right, well, I ended up getting a nice fat weld on this big crack I had in there. And I think the whole thing is just gonna be a lot stronger now that I have it braced all the way out here instead. So I'm pretty happy with this. So now that I know that part is not going anywhere, we can start focusing on the tip of this thing and get a new cutting edge on here. But as I mentioned previously, this whole thing is a little bit twisted relative to where the whole thing is attached. So I'm gonna want to try and straighten that up. And I think I'm gonna put this main piece on here and get that nice and straight and sort of use that to square off everything else as we go. All right, guys, so I've been fiddling around with this for a little bit to try and figure out where to make my cuts out here. And to help me do that, I put some pieces on the sides to extend them out and try to find the corners. But it turns out that this whole thing is so poorly made that it's gonna be really difficult, if not impossible, to square this all up. Because these two corners, they are just never gonna line up and meet up in the right place. This is all gonna be shifted over relative to the other end. Now, again, it's not super critical with these shovels because my old Ford is just not that accurate. It's not gonna make a huge difference. So I'm just gonna have to do the best I can with what I got here. I really don't have time to remake the whole shovel. No, this bottom plate is actually not as thin as I thought it would be. It just looks like a regular 4mm plate. But this first part up here, it is all bent inwards, so I'm still gonna want to replace that. But maybe I only have to do it down to about here where it's straightening out again. And also I'll be moving up to that 5mm, so this first part, which is clearly taking the most beating, is gonna be a little bit stronger. But now that this front piece is cut out, it's also much more clear exactly what is going on with all the weird angles of this thing. And it really seems to all be because that this side they put on over here is just simply taller than the one over here. Because if we go off the bottom of these two things, right around there, that actually lines up pretty well with my square down there at the end of them. It's just the tops that are wildly offset. So actually the rest of this thing might just be lined up well enough after all. It really just seems that they put a bigger piece over here and just either didn't notice or just simply didn't care. And when they lined up everything else according to that, it of course became all offset. Now I could just go and account for that and just put everything lower as I was planning to do anyway, but now I'm thinking if the plasma cutter is up for it, I could just go and take those extra 1.5 to 2 centimeters off this side and make the whole thing even. That would also make it easier to line up my cutting edge out here. You know what? I think we're gonna do that. Let's straighten out this side over here. I'm gonna have to take my brace off the top, but I still want to keep this thing aligned. So this is sticking up 1 and this is sticking up 3. So yeah, we just got to take 2 centimeters off all the way down and that should solve most of my issues here. Well, here's hoping that the plasma cutter is up for the job. The thickness shouldn't be an issue, but it is some very dense steel. I'm not sure how it likes that. Let's find out. All right, now it should be significantly easier to get things lined up. So let's go ahead and finally get that new cutting edge attached on there. Oh yeah, that is going to be so much better. I think we can finally tack this piece in place. Now this edge is finally lining up a whole lot better with everything else. I'm really quite happy with that. It's going to improve this shovel quite a bit. It honestly took quite a bit of doing to get to this point, but now the rest of it should just be a matter of cutting out all of these damaged and rusty parts and just replace that with some fresh steel. But that's all going to be fairly similar to the stuff that we just did on the first shovel, so I'm not going to have you watch all of that again in great detail. So, cue the montage. Alright guys, here we go. This thing is looking much more solid now. I'm pretty happy with this. And also, this time I did take my time and cleaned it a little, so these welds are looking a lot better. They're laying in there much nicer this time. So this thing is going to be nice and strong. Now, I haven't welded it up along here just yet because the final thing I want to do is to just fix up these corners that have been rounded off here. Now, it's probably not critical. It would most likely work just fine like this, but clearly these corners are seeing a lot of wear, and I do have a little bit of that hot dogs left over. I have some of these cut off pieces, and I think something like this is going to work just fine in the height. So, like, if I split that, that's going to make a nice new corner for this. Yeah, I know these are some slightly small pieces, but again, it was just what I had left. I'm literally working with scraps here. I know there are some welding rods called hard-facing rods. They would have probably been ideal for this, but I don't have any of those, so we're just MIG welding. Well, it ain't much, but it's honest work. I still think it was worth the effort to give it those extra reinforced corners. But that also means that this one is now done, and we only have this big one left. Well, I guess the main challenge with this one is going to be that all the parts are just a lot bigger, so the whole thing is just very heavy to try and move around. Anyway, this here is a pretty good example of what happens when you use a grading bucket for pretty much anything other than grading, like for regular digging or for prying on things like concrete or tree roots. You end up bending these things, and this one has a really bad bend in it right here. It doesn't even look as bad on camera as it does in real life. Maybe we can just compare it to this new piece right here. Yeah. Now overall, the whole edge of this has quite a bit of banana to it, but it definitely looks like they've been prying on something right here in this one spot where it's even more bent. This also means that it's broken off in the welds out here in the corners, which they've welded several times. Kind of hard to see with this dirt, but there's just layer upon layer of weld out here, and it's the same over in the other corner. So I think we're going to be fixing most of the issues with this just by putting this new cutting edge on it. Not only is this a whole lot wider, it's also a lot thicker than the stuff that was on there originally. So just adding this is going to strengthen this whole thing significantly. But because it is so badly bent, I am going to have to replace some of the bottom metal of this. But it's also pretty rusty, so I might end up having to put a nice big new piece into this. I do have enough metal left over for doing that. And the final thing is over here on this side and also back there, it has rusted all the way through. I think it's been sitting somewhere for a while with water pooled in that corner, rusting it out, because the other side is actually pretty good and solid. So overall, this is going to be mostly the same work as we just did to the little narrow trenching shovel, only with bigger components, but also without all that realigning of edges and corners, because this does look like it's lining up just fine. So we just got to replace some metal. Let's get to it. All right, well, that is most of this thing taken care of, or at least all the parts that had to be somewhat straight and aligned. That is all put in place, and now I have some nice straight lines to work off. This really means I only have to do something about this whole bottom section of this. Now my problem is that that is a really big piece of fairly heavy steel to try to make into such a nice curve. I don't think I'm going to be able to get away with doing that. Even if I try bending that with the front loader of the old Ford, it's probably just going to lift up the Ford rather than bend the metal. So I was kind of hoping that I could at least leave some of it in place, at least this middle part where it has the most curve to it. And I think that's doable because the worst parts of this is right down here at the very bottom where it's become quite thin and has rusted out, and up here in the very top where it's just so badly mangled, which is very clear now that I put a straight piece in front of it. So my thinking is that I'm just going to put in 2 long strips of fresh metal at the top and bottom of this thing. So I'll cut it out like along there roughly and get rid of this part to put a nice new straight piece in up here. And I'll also cut it along that part because right here is where the bend starts. So I can replace this rusty bit and then just leave this curved section in place. And luckily the overall shape of this whole backside is not very critical on this particular shovel, so I think I can get away with doing it like this, given that I just don't have any good reliable way of making this nice curved piece, so I think we'll leave this in place. What a disaster! My trusty old DeWalt grinder is broken. Well, it's not even the grinder part of it, it's the on-off button. That thing just disintegrated and fell off. What a shame. I've had this thing for, I don't know, a decade or something. Man, this has been running a lot. Oh well. Well, good news. Turns out you can still buy these. It's like the cheapest DeWalt grinder that's available. But hey, it's definitely proven itself to me. Alrighty, well, let's carry on. Well, my stick welding, it is improving, but it's still not pretty. But it's definitely good enough. And this also means that this one is done. So we are now finally done with all 3 shovels. Alright people, here we go. I feel like this machine can now be set up a lot better for doing some real digging. And with the relatively small amount of digging I have to do with this, these should now last a really long time. But once again, I greatly underestimated just how long this project would take. It's already been several weeks since I started working on these shovels. But to be fair, I did also end up doing quite a bit more than I initially thought I would. But also the video itself has gotten a lot longer than what I intended. So once again, we are going to split these videos up because now we have the machine ready for some digging. Now we need to get it ready for some driving, but that's going to be up in the next video. So thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.